Well, thanks for joining me today, and thanks for joining us, all of you who are online and watching this recorded later. I want to talk to you about an odd parable, perhaps one of the oddest parables that Jesus ever tells, at least because of the interpretations that are made of it. And it's the parable of the unjust steward. If you go around online and research this thing, you're going to see a lot of commentators, pastors, biblical scholars, Christians of all walks struggle and squirm through this parable with virtually the same conclusion, that Jesus is teaching that there are some select occasions in which one can be dishonest with money. Now, as you might imagine, this interpretation, shall we say, chafes the readers of the Gospels. It makes them very uncomfortable, but it also seems very much out of step with all the other teachings that dominate the Gospels. Nevertheless, we see lots of people with various interpretations and excuses, reasons to weasel themselves out of this parable. So we're going to assume here that not everybody knows the specifics of what I'm referring to. So let's put the parable in front of us. I'll read the parable, and as I do, just kind of think, what's the positive lesson that Jesus is trying to draw out of this, what really is sinful behavior? What's the positive lesson? This is from Luke chapter 16. If you don't have your order of service in front of you, you can look it up online right now. Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 15. Here we go. Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses.' So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' 100 baths of olive oil,' he replied." Now you see in your order of service there, if you have it, I have in parentheses 900 gallons. In parentheses is what other translations say, which I believe to be inaccurate. But I'm just trying to make a point here that translations do matter, particularly in a story like this, because the spiritual numbers here are of importance. So 100 baths of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked the second, "How much do you owe?" 100 measures of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 80. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings." Now that one, verse 9, is also a bit problematic. A better translation is, "And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon," not worldly wealth, unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. So we'll come back to why that's important later, but just kind of keep that in your mind for now. So back to verse 10. "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon, or money." So that's the end of the parable. And hopefully you see the situation, because the manager is fired, but before he leaves, he negotiates with the debtors of the owner to sign new contracts so that they owe less than they actually do. Of course, the debtors are really happy about this, of course, and the plan is that these debtors will feel obliged to this manager so that when he's jobless, which will happen soon, they're going to help him out. So the deceitful manager uses his way to figure out how to manipulate the money to secure his future. So how does this end up? Well, we don't really know how the whole thing goes in later on life, but we know that the master comes along and figures out what has been done, and he says, wow, you are really clever. That was shrewd. So how do we make sense of this? Why is the master saying, boy, you're shrewd for dealing dishonestly with this situation? Instead of just owning up to your failure as a manager, why are you taking my assets and further diluting their value and being further wasteful? And you're doing it but for your own selfish needs, right? I mean, the parable describes this guy as a dishonest or a unrighteous manager, right? And so we notice that the solution to being caught is being dishonest. It's like two wrongs making a right, almost, is what it seems to be teaching us here. He doesn't repent. He doesn't change his ways. There's no spiritual awakening. The solution is to further in being dishonest, because he believes that using the master's money in this way will get him friends. The interesting thing about this is that compare this parable to that of the prodigal son. What happens to the prodigal son when the wealth runs out? He's forced to take up humiliating work, and it's the same kind of humiliating work that the manager in this story wants to avoid. Right? If we think about the prodigal son some more, it's like, well, where's the welcome from the prodigal son's friends, right? He gave all his money away for parties and women and stuff like that. How come these people didn't welcome him into their homes if this plan of giving away money makes you friends? The two parables don't add up. Furthermore, in this manager, he didn't set aside any money for himself, so we see that he's been wasteful. And that's how we see the connection between the prodigal son and the manager, in that both of these characters are wasteful with money. So think about how quickly this situation devolves, all right? After this manager's found out, in his internal monologue, he says, what shall I do? And he rejects the idea of honest options for getting out of this, digging and begging. So he stands in this position of being condemned. And so then what the manager does is not just make himself more dishonest, but he's also making other people more dishonest by cutting them slack on their debts. So this parable has a whole lot of problems because, again, you can't solve dishonesty by adding more dishonesty to it. So are we really to believe that the master comes along and says, good job, well done? It doesn't seem like that's the way a manager would actually react. So this brings up a whole lot of questions as to how are we supposed to interpret this parable. There are some people who say, oh, well, this just shows that you've got to have a plan. Jesus wants to make sure that we all have a plan for the afterlife, and that's what's going on here. Jesus is applauding this guy had a way out. And it doesn't really hold up, though, because the way out is about being dishonest. There are lots of variations on that theme of this guy, enriching, you got to be nice to other people, but he's being nice to other people by being dishonest with his jobs. I mean, it doesn't hold up. So people, they try to figure out a way to squint real hard and see that this parable is actually about something good, but they're not finding it. One of the more interesting interpretations I found was that a guy saying, well, this story is an ironic tale. The idea was that, well, in the prodigal son, well, we see that, wealth doesn't buy you friends. But Jesus is saying, well, actually, sometimes, even though I've told you it doesn't buy friends and happiness, sometimes it actually does. It's kind of this irony that Jesus is apparently promoting. So, anyway, with that in mind, I think the guy's onto something. There is some irony here, but it's not for those reasons, and we'll bring that together in the end. So let's take a look at this parable and see what the new church has to offer that would help us make some sense of it, how we can understand this a bit differently. Because in speaking, if we understand correspondence and stuff like that, spiritual symbolism, we can get an idea of what's really going on. So in giving this parable, the Lord was speaking to all of us who claim to be his disciples, because every one of us is his steward. All of our possessions, our knowledge, our responsibilities, our opportunities, everything is given to us by the Lord to use in his service. And the reality is, every one of us has, to some degree, been unfaithful and wasted some of our master's goods, using our gifts and talents and abilities for a selfish end instead of for the Lord's kingdom, for God's goals, right? And so from time to time, like this steward in this parable, we are brought up short and realize that, you know what? I have not been worthy of all the gifts given to me. So, well, what about these ways out? The steward says, all right, well, there's two honest ways out. I could dig or I could beg. And symbolically what this is about, well, digging, it's about, searching for truth. So you need digging. And the truth that he's looking for is this idea that people are inherently good. And he says, well, that's not true. He can see that even within himself, that, well, I'm not inherently good, so I can't dig. I can't just find the answer that I'm looking for kind of philosophically. And then he says, I can't beg, I won't beg. And the idea about begging is this kind of idea that the Lord saves us all by mercy. Just that you say, oh Lord, I've been a bad boy, can you just let me into heaven anyway? And that doesn't work. Begging doesn't get us into heaven because we actually have to do the work. We actually have to be responsible with the talents that we're given, the gifts that we're given. So, you're not going to dig your way out of this mess, and you're not going to beg your way out of it. You've not been a good person. You have been a dishonest, a unrighteous manager. So the solution that he has of cutting deals really is the only option he has left. Now, the debtors that are being called in, these are the Lord's gifts and abilities that he's given us. So oil is about love. So the 100 measures of oil represent all the love and goodness in which would have been produced had we been faithful with the master's business. The 50 is what we now can get out of it. So should have produced 50, but now all we can get, should have gotten 100, but now all we can get is 50. Same thing with the wheat. We should have been able to manage getting 100 bushels of wheat from the debtor, but the best we can get now is 80. So our duty is to recognize that all of this is the Lord's, and that we acknowledge that it's all his. And sometimes what we've got to do is realize that we need to get the most out of it that we can. Key to understanding this parable is spiritual numbers and the correspondence of numbers. Because believe it or not, as crazy as this may sound to our time and space minds here, 100 is symbolic of something that is full. Well, guess what? So is 50. So the manager still receives in kind a full payment. Same thing with the 80. Apparently, it too has a correspondence of fullness. So it's in spiritual terms where you say, okay, we think about the bad things that we've done in life and we amend them. We still have this kind of debt, but we've now done the right thing. And as we start doing the right thing, well, guess what? The bad stuff's forgotten. The wastefulness is forgotten. The missed opportunities is forgotten. Now you are now in full service. Even if you didn't get everything you did, it's okay because the past is wiped away. It's now about this idea you have now become committed to getting the most out of the talents in the business that you can. You've now put these things into use. And so that's what this parable is about, saying, you know what, I've come up short. This stuff isn't my own. I'm going to get the best I can out of it. And so this manager is actually, while he's seemingly dishonest, the reality is we are all dishonest to an extent, and that we must get the most out of the Lord's talents and gifts that He's given us to the best that we can. So we say, all right, I'm going to put my life into these gifts and talents. Whatever it is that you have that the Lord has given you in your life, you say, I'm going to make the most out of it. So we've got to change our thinking. So instead of thinking about them as something that serves us, a talent that serves us, think about your talents and abilities as things that serve other people. Because one of the hidden messages in this parable is that there are a lot of people who search after unrighteous mammon. And if we look at Divine Providence 250, it gives us a kind of clue as to the people in particular that are being addressed here. It says, in the spiritual sense, however, by unrighteous mammon are meant concepts of truth and good, concepts which the evil possess, and which they use only to gain for themselves advancement and riches. It is these concepts which good people and the sons of light are to make friends for themselves, and which will receive them into everlasting habitations. So there's a warning here saying that, you know what? Evil people learn about how to look good, and they learn how to say the right things. They learn all these things so that they can become popular, so they can become famous, so they can become powerful. Evil people, the Lord is saying, do a really good job of acquiring for themselves good things and true concepts in order to advance themselves. And that the sons of light don't do it. They don't do it. But they would be wise. They would be wise if they acquired themselves this information. Because good people, if they acquire it, even if they're doing it to try to advance themselves, will realize that when they fail, that's verse 9 again, back to that whole idea that when they fail at this, and they realize that it's empty, they'll realize that, oh, you know what? I've still got these actions. I've still got this information. I can continue doing it. And you know what? I will actually be received into heavenly joy because I'm actually happy, turns out, doing these things for the right reasons. So I think there is irony in this parable. I think it is a bit of an ironic tale because it says that the sons of light aren't really good at seeking out this information. They're not really good at seeking the truth versus the evil are. And so I think that perhaps this parable is a bit of a puzzle for us. The Lord gives it to us because its meaning isn't obvious, and therefore to find the true answer about what this is really about, you have to be a seeker of truth, which is what you need in order to have everlasting life. So He's given us a bit of a puzzle, I think. I think He's given us something that's kind of an ironic twist to it, that in order for the good people to get what they need out of it, they've got to seek it, which is what the Lord wants for us in the first place. He wants us to seek out that truth. Hopefully for you, what you can take away, if nothing else, is remembering that all of your talents, all of your abilities, all your gifts are from the Lord, and the goal of all of us, when we've realized that we've not used it to our full abilities, is that, yes, go out and say, you know what, I've messed up. I haven't gotten as much for you as I should have, Lord, but I'm going to cut the best deals I can going forward because I know this full deployment of your services will actually be the full payment that you're actually asking for. Amen.